and zoom back into the final game that we previewed going into week 2. It was the big one, the Battle of the Brands, Battle of the Giants, there on the Palace on the Prairie. Last time these two met was in 1976 in the Orange Bowl for a national championship. The second meeting, just a regular non-conference game, ended up being 24-13. The Sooners and their defense overwhelming the true freshman quarterback Bryce Underwood, and I guess John Mateer had an all-right game for himself, as we'll get into it here. Defense. It's the year of the defense. Brett Venables game plan really well. I think Michigan, going into this, they didn't really want to take shots down the field with their, again, young quarterback. And it ended up being what we asked, who was going to be winning in the trenches, and Oklahoma did that, and it was more than enough to defend their home turf there. Javante Barnes had 6 carries for 24 yards. Torrey Blaylock, 9 carries for 24 yards. Not crazy in the stats, but in key moments, those guys picked up some in those plays that they got those yardage. They moved the ball, allowed John Mateer the breathing room that he needed. He had 19 carries for 74 yards. That he had the bulk of the ground attack there. A lot of plays towards the end where Oklahoma started to utilize his legs and more quarterback designs, read options, things that were, his go-to bread and butter plays that he was successful when he was over there at Washington State last year. Also with his with his current offensive coordinator, not former, I was going to say, well, technically they're former Wazoo Cougs, but come over together from Pullman. And yeah, the offense seems like it's going to work. Michigan on defense just didn't have that grittiness, didn't have that like full kind of go that they would have had, that you would have saw against Ohio State last year or Alabama. They just didn't seem like they had it, and allowing just little chip plays here and there. There were some kind of big plays that John Mateer got down the field, and then eventually, play after play, eventually the Sooners got into the end zone, and it seemed like every time they got into the red zone, there was no way Michigan was going to stop them. There was a couple missed field goals, so maybe Michigan could have had a couple more chances there. But towards the end, it was more or less Oklahoma draining the clock. I think they burned about 8 minutes there in the fourth quarter to not allow Michigan another drive. They kicked the field goal to make it 2 possessions with like 2 minutes left. So it was kind of just great management, I would say, by Brett Venables there at the end. And I think it was a little off in what they had on offense last week in terms of their offensive line. They switched out their left tackle, center, both this left side, left guard, left tackle, right tackle, and their center were totally different in the Illinois State game versus what they had going against Michigan to open up, which was like, oh, okay, like they just played with a not makeshift, maybe their backups. They wanted to save guys for this game going into the week. I thought was an interesting call there, because you kind of want to get your guys going a little bit. Regardless, they played well, and they had a true freshman in at left tackle on top of that. That was kind of surprising to see. Fauci, who is our first true freshman that we have witnessed in our watch alongs in the trenches for the offensive line. And they did, I think, a decent job in protecting John Mateer. He did have some off passes, some like passes that were nowhere near his intended target. Threw an interception as well, but he got back into it. Ended up getting 270 yards, 21 for 34. That's not too bad. I just don't know how this is going to be sustainable throughout the season. I think he's an excellent athlete, but when you go up against, like, I think a more of bigger size defense, I was disappointed with the Michigan defense. They definitely had the unfortunate issue of not having Jayshon Barnum there in the first half. He was suspended, but you still had some guys that were deep. They just were not deep enough in stopping drives and getting themselves off the field, it seemed like. And then on top of that, the struggles that you had on the offensive side of the ball, Justice Haynes, I think, was basically the vocal point of this offense. 19 carries for 125 yards, got himself a nice touchdown, which I think was the one play drive that they opened up this second half with, which was also their only touchdown in this game in general. Bryce Underwood, I think, was just not set up for success. I think they should have took some shots earlier in the game to kind of get things going, gain momentum. They had no momentum in that first half whatsoever. They just were passing balls behind the line of scrimmage or just pass it. And it was just basically in the flats. There was really nothing in the middle, no deep shots. That didn't happen until like later in the game. I guess not that they didn't want to use Bryce Underwood's arm. They just didn't want him to make a mistake. And then once he made that mistake, maybe they thought like, oh, this game's just going to be gone. And it was more or less not taking those risks. And that's the reason why they could not find any kind of gear, any kind of, again, momentum. They definitely had some big plays. Again, the 75-yarder from Justice Haynes opening up the second half. That seems like, oh, okay, Michigan maybe are going to make the right adjustments, but they just didn't do anything after that. I think they set up for another field goal and then basically had too many. I think this is going to be an issue for Michigan in throwing the ball a little bit too much and not kind of going towards the ground approach. And then on top of that, using the combination of like, okay, teams know we're going to be running it. Let's do some play action. It's just, there was too much straight stuff where they were like in shotgun or in that spread formations where it was like, oh, okay, like whatever Oklahoma was seeing, they knew that they were going to pass it. They weren't going to be running the ball. And then if they tried to run out of that, it just, it was too spread out. It wasn't as clean as it has been, I could think, in the past. Even though they had some guys from last year's offensive line here, they definitely had some issues though with injuries in the middle of the part of the game. Giovanni El Hadi came out. I think it was in the second half. He had a defensive player roll up on him. He popped out, and then eventually they had to pop out the other guard for a play or two. I think Brady Norton had a nut shot where he had to like come off the field for a couple plays. But even with that, I think they even protected, like I've said in the offseason, they protected Bryce Underwood well. He only got sacked one time. It's just the running game that Oklahoma, I guess maybe it was very similar also to the Alabama game last year, to where like they just knew what a running play was going to look like in the pre-snap. And they jumped on it. They had 9 tackles for loss. 8 tackles for loss. One of those tackles for loss was a sack. But they were just on it, able to shut them down, creating third and long scenarios for a young quarterback as well. Just was not in the cards for Michigan, unfortunately. And we also got this one wrong. We had an 8-point difference in favor of Michigan. Ended up being kind of 11. I can't do math. 11 for Oklahoma, going the other way. But for some reason, Michigan was still in this game up until that fourth quarter somehow, some way. They just need to, again, find that extra gear. It's going to be interesting to see how they progress. And on top of that, also to see the approach, if it continues for John Mateer and trying to over-rely and using his feet for Oklahoma. I think against a team that can definitely shut him down, bring the proper pressure and containment of him, Oklahoma might not be successful. And then on top of that, they have one of the toughest schedules there in the SEC in general. But regardless, they win there in Norman, defend their home turf on the Palace, on the Prairie, 24-13. OU goes 2-0. And